See in the documentary series The Turkic World Continuation about the most significant, in our opinion, states, the Golden Horde's successors, which played an important role in the geopolitics of Eurasia in 15th to 18th centuries. We move towards ourselves, recognizing ourselves in others. Oljas Süleymanov. After Ulugh Muhammad was expelled from Sarai and Said Ahmed was expelled from the Crimea, Kichi Muhammad took over the sizable territory and he became known as the Khan of the Great Horde. The Crimean aristocracy was dissatisfied with actions of Khan Kichi Muhammad, who allotted a few dozen ailes as gift to his beks who had arrived in the Crimea, although before that they had no land here. The Crimean aristocracy, standing in opposition to Kichi Muhammad Khan, began to meet secretly with Hadzhi Girey, who was in Lithuania at the court of Casimir. They promised him a throne. At the same time, they also negotiated with Casimir to help Hadzhi Girey. Hadzhi Girey began to pursue a Western-inspired policy in the Crimea. He concluded with Casimir an alliance against Khan Said Ahmed. In 1452, when Said Ahmed's troops invaded the Lithuanian state and reached Lvov, Hadzhi Girey attacked them from the rear. In this battle, many Said Ahmed's warriors were killed. He himself fled away, but in 1455, during an unsuccessful campaign against Lithuania, he was taken captive and was imprisoned in Kazan fortress. With the capture of Said Ahmed and his children, there were no pretenders to the Crimean throne. The defeat of Said Ahmed's horde led to recognition of independence of the Crimean Khanate by its neighbors, Poland and Lithuania. But Khan Kichi Muhammad, who possessed a great military force, didn't recognize the Crimean Khanate and continued to consider himself the supreme Khan and the ruler of the Crimean Ulus. The independence of the Crimean Khanate was not also recognized by the Genoese, who, for the last years, even more expanded their privileges in the Crimea. In 1454, near Kerch, during the meeting of Khan Hadzhi Girey's ambassador with the commander of the Ottoman fleet, Admiral Amir Kahya, there was concluded an agreement on access of the Ottomans to the Crimean Peninsula. Sultan Mehmed II, in order to punish the Genoese, sent troops to Tavria in 1475. On the Crimea shore, Ottoman Janissaries came and, supported by ship artillery, besieged Genoese fortresses, perpetrating terrible slaughter there. An agreement on the vassalage of the Khanate was concluded between Sultan and Khan. In the future, vassal relations were established more or less spontaneously, depending on the specific situation of the both states at one moment or another. With the support of Sultan, the Crimea declared itself independent of Sarai. The Crimean Khanate had a very high degree of autonomy within the Ottoman state. It was not just a province like Anatolia and Balkan territory. If we use Roman terms, they were an ally and a client. There was a client state that had its own state structure, to which the Ottomans intervened, probably only in the least and mostly in a cultural way. These relations were very productive for the both sides. The Ottoman state received not only a very good, reliable cavalry, but also a constant flow of human commodity. Even the latest raid of the Crimean Khanate that was in the year of its fall brought 10,000 slaves, which were then sold in Istanbul. The overlords of the two continents is part of the Crimean Khan's title, which fully sounds like Hakan of two seas and Sultan of two continents. Alexei Govoranovsky. But don't think that the Crimean Khans, when they chose such a title, were possessed with megalomania. Despite the fact that from time to time the Crimean Khanate included not only the Crimea but also extended even to Tula, and with the count of dependent territories extended to Lvov, and at some points in history included Kazan, it certainly could not be called a state of two continents. But the point here is not only in vanity. It is just a little-known fact that Crimean Khans were successors to Genghis Khan's power. With separation of the Crimean Khanate, the Turk-Mongols of Dashti Kipchak lost an important region in the south with rich trading cities connected with Western European markets. With the loss of the Crimea and the Black Sea coast, Dashti Kipchak was in a very difficult situation. Especially tangible for them was the loss of winter pastures in the south, where they usually migrated with their livestock when cold weather began. As for the Great Horde, when Kichi Muhammad Khan died in 1459, his son Ahmed became his successor, claiming to be the legitimate Khan of the whole Juche Zulus, thus incurring displeasure of Crimean Khan Mengli Girey, as well as Astrakhan Khans and Nogay Mirzas, who also laid account with this throne. Grand Prince of Moscow Ivan III also joined the coalition. This was the beginning of defeat of the Great Horde. The internal strife for the succession to the throne, which began under the rule of Uzbek Khan in the Golden Horde, passed into a kind of inheritance of the Crimean Khanate. The internal strife broke out because part of the Beks, when choosing the Khan, demanded his election under Mongol laws, that is, according to laws of Yassa. Such a candidate should not be a son, but should be, according to seniority, the former Khan's brother. Another part of the Beks, adhering to the Sharia, nominated one of the Khan's sons for this post. Such a contested decision, turning into bloodshed, was not uncommon during existence of the Crimean Khanate. Despite the proximity of Europe and Western influence that came through European merchants and the Greeks, Italians, Jews, etc., living in Crimea, the Turk-Mongols continued to live according to their ancient traditions, under laws of Yassa. They demonstrated their own flexibility, both Islam and Jenghisism. The fact is that Jenghisism was a political doctrine, which in different periods of time had a different worldview content, foundation. That is, initially they began it as a cult of ancestors, which in conditions of a political task for organizing an attack, remained in a large, strong empire. In itself, the ideology of the cult of ancestors was patastery. It was not capable of creating a stable, sustained state. It was very effective for organizing major conquests. It was an effective organization for war. But in order to maintain a stable peace, this organization was ineffective. It then fell to pieces according to the family clan principle. And then other ideological systems, not polytheistic, but already pantheistic and monotheistic ones, came into play. We see how patastery Jenghisism gave place to the Sunni version of the political doctrine. We say Sultanate, Cengizism. This was not only the possession of Berke Khan's branch on the level of government, which prepared activities for Nogay, Uzbek Khan, and which later, in the 16th century, was continued by Gireys in the Crimean Khanate, Shaybanids and Mogusids in the east of Juchis Ulus. Don't be cruel if you're asked of something. Don't be quiet when you're oppressed. Crimean Tatars proverb. Turkic Mongol aristocrats of the Crimea, the most active fighters for independence and supporters of securing land private ownership, never obtained it even after formation of the Crimean Khanate. No matter how the political status of the Crimea changed, no matter how the Russian Empire tried to introduce its own order on land use and serfdom, the Turks of the Crimea remained free and in land use adhered to their norms of communal use. Although by this time the institution of serfdom was introduced throughout Europe, Russia and Ukraine, this didn't affect the Turk Mongols of the Crimea and other indigenous people who lived in the former territory of the Golden Horde state, in the Kazan, Siberian, Astrakhan Khanates and the Great and Nogay hordes. In the Crimean Khanate, as in the Golden Horde, much attention was paid to science and art. In numerous madrasas, they studied not only the Quran, but also Arabic, rhetoric, astronomy, and jurisprudence. In fact, it was a higher school that was not inferior to the European one, and in some respects, it was superior to the latter. Many scientists, theologians, philosophers, writers, etc. lived in Bakhchisarai. All this was encouraged by the Khans and the government of the Crimea. Many Khans themselves were talented and gifted people. For example, Gazi Girey, 1588-1608, was a great musician and a talented poet. Poets were also Begadir Girey, 1640-1641, and Selim Girey, died in 1704, and some other members of the Khans clan. Most of the Khans appreciated the form of art highly developed in the Crimea, dialogue. Even in campaigns, they were always accompanied by recognized masters of wit. There are few places where we can see such a large number of archaeological monuments that are not underground, but right before our eyes. This tradition has not been interrupted since ancient times, since the times of the ancient world. There is simultaneously a nomadic culture. There are burial mounds. At the same time, there are ancient ruins of antiquity. Simultaneously, there is a powerful medieval fortress culture. And there is presence of Christians from Italy. It is also a powerful cultural affair. At the same time, there are very powerful ties with the Muslim world. That is, long before Turkey, it was the most powerful representation of Eastern Europe, for example, Slavic peoples. All this, of course, could begin to crystallize in the place where it was possible to convert all this into a new culture gradually for a long time. These almost ideal conditions for creative and cultural growth predetermined an unusually high level of culture, level of development, level of visual creation, or what we have in the Crimea. In any Tatar, you can feel at once a delicate hereditary culture, but it is infinitely fragile and incapable of defending itself. 150 years of rude imperial domination over Crimea has cut the ground from under their feet, and they can no longer take new routes thanks to their Greek, Gothic and Italian heritage. Maximilian Voloshin. Let me tell you a little about what the Horde was at that time, the ruler of which was Crimean Khan. First of all, let's know that by the time Crimean Khan achieved the status of the ruler of the whole Great Horde, the Horde had long been split into sovereign uluses. But despite the fragmentation of the Horde, Sheikh Ahmed, defeated by Mengli Rey, was the last Horde ruler, whose political dependence was recognized de jure by the Russian state. Gireys are Turkic Timur's descendants, Juch's descendants, Genghis Khan's descendants. And as one of the Genghis clans, they had every reason to lay claim to power in the whole Juch's Ulus. Turkic Timur's descendants participated in the Great Strife, and for some time they raised their representatives on a white felt in Sarayshik in the Golden Horde. They had exactly the same claims and reasons for considering themselves Khans of the whole Juch's Ulus, like Shaybanids, like Urusids and like Astarhanids. And each of them formed a continuous dynastic succession to the founder, Juch's Ulus. But in addition, there was also a group of factors such as a social request, a social order for them to rule. On the one hand, they were supported by trading corporations of Muslim merchants, Sunnites. On the other hand, they were supported by those clans in which there was a certain tradition of Muslim education. After all, in fact, the split of the Horde was motivated primarily by ideological reasons. Formally, it looked like a confrontation of doctrines where the dynastic factor was, or it was fundamental, and adherence to one or another doctrine of Islam was an optional factor. It was as the case with Ilkhans in Persia and as the case with Tamerlane with Timurids. This, tentatively speaking, is a syncretic version of the Muslim dogma, which assumes on the one hand the Muslim doctrine, on the other hand the pre-Islamic doctrine of succession to the throne. For them, the factor of succession to the throne is fundamental, and the factor of Muslim sanction is secondary. And the Sunni version proceeds from the opposite thesis that the factor to service to Ummah is decisive, and the factor of his origin, the title of Sultan, is optional.
Фактор его происхождения, как основа для притязания на титул султана, является факультативным.
Sheikh Ahmed ruled the Horde state, but no longer that great Golden Horde headed by Batu, Tohtamish and other mightier Khans, but only its remnant, the Great Horde. The Golden Horde became the Great Horde. By that time, new Turkic states broke away from the Horde government, the former possessions of the Golden Horde, the Tatar-Siberian Khanate and the Nogai Horde of the people close to the present-day Kazakhs, as well as the Crimea. The Great Horde state was founded by Sheikh Ahmed's brother Seyyid Ahmed, who became the Horde Khan after the murder of unlucky Ugrian standing Khan Ahmad. Returning from Ugra River after a campaign, Ugrian standing Khan Ahmad was captured in his tent and killed by a troop led by Siberian Khan Ivak and Nogai Bey Yamgurchi. And the Crimean Khans gained a high status and title after the victory over Sheikh Ahmed.
В титуле крымских ханов материки остались теми же, но поменялись лишь моря.
In Crimean Khan's title, the continents remained the same, but the list of the seas changed. They were the Black Sea and the Caspian, on the shores of which possessions of Batu Khan's Ulus extended at one time. And in 1515, 13 years after the defeat of Sheikh Ahmed, Crimean Khan Mehmed I Giray, Mengli Giray's son, took even the title of Padishah of all Mongols, focusing not on the greatness of the Golden Horde Khans Batu and Toktamish, but on Genghis Khan. After all, once the Golden Horde separated out as a loss of Juchi, Genghis Khan's eldest son. Despite the fact that the Crimean Khans got the title early enough that gave them the right to be considered the ruler of steppe people, they were not delighted with the remnants of the hordes. The Crimean Khanate saw the main threat to its security from side of steppe inhabitants, residents of the former Golden Horde Ulus. In fact, the Crimean Khanate was the horde state, which was against the horde.
Воевала против самой Орды. Как это ни парадоксально звучит.
In steppe nomad encampments of the horde, for decades there was a fierce struggle for power, exhausting the Crimea with leapfrog of rulers and constant change of waves of armed strangers hiding in the peninsula after being expelled from the horde capital or preparing for sudden advance to the Volga. Namagan's house ruled there, challenging domination of the Crimea with Girays. From there they carried out devastating raids on the peninsula, and a troop of 1,000 nomads could desolate its small territory in a matter of days. Examples of such raids were not limited to Tamerlane's period and the horde disorder. Nomads of the Volga region and the Pre-Caspian and even the Trans-Caspian region invaded Crimea almost every decade in 1470–1520. Crimean Khans barely managed to contain this onslaught in 1530–1540 and still had to stand ready for repel it in the mid-1550s.
Они сами себя считали Ордой.
They considered themselves to be a horde, in a manner of speaking, or usurpers of the horde. The fact is that the situation was different. Once for them it was critically important to establish empire over Sarai. Once, following the line of common Ottoman policy, they could send military contingents to Vienna, for example, or to Poland. That is, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Once they could simply demand a tribute from Muscovy, because you there improperly pay. Girays, whose remote ancestors Genghizids came to rule the Crimean country as conquerors, repeated the experience of all the former rulers of Tavrika and began to fear the nomads of the Great Steppe, just as Bosphorus kings feared the Huns. Al-Omari, ancient Arab historian. A direct armed struggle against the rulers of steppe powers could not fully ensure security of the Crimea. Rulers of the Crimea had to choose a different way and to call for help that ancient political tradition, the strength of which was recognized by all former subjects of the horde. Inviolability of power of the supreme Khan Genghizid over the whole separate hordes, tribes and uluses. Only another Genghizid could pretend to the throne of the great Khan, and for the rest of the people, including the notable estate, it was unthinkable not to recognize this power.
Крымские гиреи сумели создать
Crimean Gireys managed to create a family community, which really turned into a political elite. Not into recruitment of candidates for the position, but into the clanship. It can be compared with the modern Saudi family in Saudi Arabia, where just the family council decides who will be the next king among 5,000 people, to the point that they sentence their people to death. And Gireys managed to create such a guild clanship in the Crimea. That is, we practically didn't meet the situation when, in a country with which the Crimean Khanate was in bad relations, suddenly appeared one of Gireys, whom they could raise on their banners, as it was in Kazan. This was the merit of this family. I think this was due to the fact that they interacted with the Ottoman house a little and also borrowed this idea. First of all, this is the power of this clan, the family clan. Not a clan in the broadest sense of the word, like Argins, Gireys, etc., but the power of this family always remains in the hands of this family. And I think that the influence of Ottoman traditions in this respect played a stabilizing role.
But
why do we, when talking about issues of succession to the throne, talk about elections? The fact is that in the Crimean Khanate there was a specific democracy. It had then an analog in neighboring powers, perhaps in Poland only. Both the Ottoman Empire and Muscovy could not boast of democracy. The Crimean Khanate nobility had the right to vote during election of the Khan. The only restriction was to elect from Giray dynasty only. During 300 years of the state's existence on the Crimean throne, 48 Khans were replaced, most of them ruled for 3 to 5 years. The nobility called some Khans to rule again. Of course, Istanbul's opinion was of great importance, but without approval of its policy by the local nobility, Khan could not rule long. He was overthrown. For accession to the throne, Khan needed a sanction of the Big Divan, Council of Representatives of the nobility, who were not appointed by Khan, but were in the Divan by birthright. During election of the Khan, elected representatives from common people also sat in the Divan. Khan shared his power with so-called Kalga, the highest official of the state and a kind of junior Khan who had his separate capital in the city of Akmechet, White Mosque, present-day Simferopol. So, the Crimean Khanate was quite democratic. At the same time, the Khan government became accustomed to coexistence with other state formations on the peninsula. Before the Turks came, part of the peninsula was occupied by Orthodox states of Theodoro, while Feodosia and the adjacent coast were governed by Genoa. The structure itself was dictated by the Sunni political doctrine, that is, the Caliph, the Sultan, because there is a canonic text that they should consult with each other about matters. The Divan was organized under the ruler, under the Sultan. That is, it could be organized because the ulama in this case would say that he was illegitimate, and simply on Friday they didn't pronounce his name from the minbar. They wouldn't listen to him, and he would lose power. Therefore, the adherence to these institutions, which were conditioned by the Sunni political legal doctrine, was inevitable. When we talk about the Divan, we know who were its members. They were not only representatives of the spiritual corporation, the ulama. They were literate people who could interpret provisions of the Quran, Sunnah, and interpret all these doctrines into economic and political challenges. They were members of trade corporations, representatives of the Bey, the clan ruler, members of the city magistrate, that is self-government. They were all key structures that were of importance. They were ideological political elites, business elites, and tribal elites. This struggle between the Crimean and Horde lines of Chingizids was carried out for many decades. It didn't end with defeat of Sheikh Ahmed and continued in rivalry between the two families for influence in those states of the Volga region and arose after Vagu Ulus in Haji Tarhan, Astrakhan in the Russian transcription, and the Kazan Khanate as well as in the Nogay Horde. At times achieving significant success in this struggle, the Urites approached their goal year by year. But soon a third force intervened in the dispute between the two Chingizid clans and settled it in its own favor. Alexei Gaivoronsky. Initially, Turkish sultans did not interfere in the internal policy of the Crimean Khanate and issues of succession to the throne, but later, when the Crimean Tatar nobility began to appeal to them when electing new khans, the rulers in Istanbul more and more interfered in the internal affairs of the Crimea. It ended after a century by almost direct appointment of Crimean khans from Istanbul. However, the history of the Crimean Khanate did not end yet. But more about that I'll tell you later.